What's going on, everybody? How you guys doing today? Welcome to Agape Night. My name is Reuben. This is my beautiful wife, Dora. Say hi.
Hello.
And we're so glad that you guys have chosen to join us today. In case you're like, I was just kind of invited, or I saw something online, or I don't really know what I'm walking into, Agape Night is a night where we take time to kind of talk about some topics that we don't necessarily engage with necessarily on a Sunday, or churches in general really talk about much. And specifically what we do is we talk about love. It's where we get that word agape from. Agape means love in Greek. And when we talk about love, it's not just love generally, but really love when it comes to relationships, love when it comes to the dating relationships you might have, love when it comes to your relationship with your parents or your siblings, and the way we connect with one another. And so what we do is we select a topic that we know is just something that is so important that we need just more conversation around, and we engage with it. We talk about it. And after we finish talking about it for a little bit, we'll take a few-minute break and also give you my number so you can send in all your live Q&A, and we'll kind of do some Q&A afterwards as well. And so that is Agape Night. I hope you're stoked because we're going to be hopping into a great topic. Before we hop into anything else, make sure you follow us on all social media stuff, whether it's Instagram. Typically, you'll get information about what we're talking about on Instagram. So follow us on Instagram, on TikTok, on Facebook, on YouTube, or whatever else there is in between that. And that way you can stay connected and all of that good stuff. All right, you guys ready for today's topic? All right, let's get into it. What's your problem?
What's my problem?
Yeah, what's your problem?
What's your problem?
Typically, my problem is you. And scene.
I think we both know that I'm not the problem in this situation. I'm never the problem.
Never the problem. I'm never the problem. Obviously, we're joking because how many of y'all have actually had a conversation like that with someone before? Oh, come on, everybody's hands should be out. We've all had that kind of a conversation with someone. Obviously, it was a little fake.
Not that dramatic, but a conversation where you see somebody who maybe doesn't know how to take ownership, or somebody who might never realize that they contribute to the problem. They are never a part of the problem. They're never the problem. They are just always right.
Yeah, and obviously we're just doing a silly little skit here to make a point, but many of us do end up in situations, whether it's with our parents or with our siblings, or maybe it is a loved one, maybe it's, a spouse, maybe it's your girlfriend, your boyfriend, or someone else. Maybe it's a school teacher, I don't know. But you're in a place where it's like you're at each other's throat and the other person just can't seem to acknowledge any fault. Someone who just, like Dora said, can't take ownership of their faults or mistakes that they've made. Maybe they're someone who thinks that they're actually good at taking criticism, but really they can't handle it. And cue in all the defense mechanisms, all of the defense, the words that you hear used in conversations like, but I didn't mean, but, and then all of the other things that we kind of follow up with. And here at Agape Night, we've talked about conflict management and managing conflict and learning to manage conflict. And we've done a lot of dialogue around that already, and just how important it is to having healthier relationships with people, but also just, how it leads to a healthier you, how it leads to a more peaceful you, how you can actually be a little bit more joyful and peaceful with yourself, and how dealing with conflict, working through conflict is just, it's so important in many ways. And today, we want to talk about it from another aspect. You guys have sent in a lot of good questions and made suggestions. And so for us, what we want to do is we want to talk about, like Dora said, ownership, and learning to kind of engage with what it means to own some of your faults or mistakes, how to actually take criticism, and also how to give good criticism. What does that look like? Because that is also a huge topic. And Dora and I, we were kind of going, it would be great to actually start off with a really funny story. It'd be great. And I wish we had one, but we don't. And the more I thought about it, I'm just being real, okay? The more I thought about it, I'm like, well, I don't have a really funny, story that everybody can laugh, and it's a great connect point, and then we make our point. I couldn't find one, and you know why? And I think this is what it is. It's because almost every single time there was some level of criticism, like, you're not putting the towel there, or you're using the toothpaste wrong, or whatever it might be. Sorry, babe, I didn't mean to mimic you like that. But whatever it might be, right? It's so interesting in how in every single one of those small areas, for me, and I know for Dora, she has her own experience with this as well, but how our defense mechanism comes like you didn't even know it was there. How all of a sudden your back sits up a little straight, your chest gets a little tighter, right? You're taking shorter breaths, maybe your eyes are just a little bit more fixated on what's going on, and you're just hyper aware. Why? Well, there could be so many different reasons why, but for me, I know it was like the smallest things, I would just get defensive. And so it wasn't like there was one big thing there were many big things, but there wasn't like one big thing that was funny that I could think of. But there were so many things throughout our entire, I don't know how many years we're married now, but for all of the years where it's like...
This is like a monthly thing now.
It's fine. Jesus knows it, it's okay. So my point is, we all... I don't even know what my point was there. My point for this is that at the end of the day, I found myself defensive on so many different levels. And even till today, look, I'm not a perfect person by any means. I'll be having a conversation with one of my kids. We'll take Arabella, for example, and she would have done something. And as a father who makes mistakes, sometimes I yell. And so I'll yell, and I know in the moment, I'm like, I know I shouldn't be yelling. She's a kid, she doesn't get it. She's like, I should just be graceful. But I'll yell, and in the moment, I'll have immediate regret, right? And yet in the moment, I'm also trying to justify to myself, like, no, I'm in the right. There was a reason. It was justified to yell here. And then it often happens. Dora will kind of give me this look. And if you know Dora, you know the look. And she gives me the look, and I'm like, I know I'm wrong, but you know what? I'm not gonna admit that I'm wrong. Babe, she was gonna hurt herself. Like whatever the excuse I can make up in that time to kind of feel better about it, or seem like, I had a justified reason for doing something that I know I shouldn't have done. In the moment, you're heated, you just don't wanna admit it. And it'll take me a few seconds, and oftentimes I do come around and actually go and I'll apologize to Arabella or whoever and be like, I'm sorry I did that. Or said that, and it's so interesting though, how in the moment, right? In the moment, we often don't get there. In fact, if Dora hadn't said anything, I probably would have never gotten there. I might have just felt bad about it. I might have done something subtle, like I'll make Arabella an extra cheese bacon sandwich and she'll be happy about it, and that'll be my way of making up. While the truth is that she's probably gonna carry baggage from me not saying anything about it. And I just don't know what that means or what that'll do. And so even till today, in all of our unique ways, I know we all have our own ways, I think, where we struggle to kind of own up to the things that we do, receive criticism, and on many levels also learn how to give good criticism. And so that's why I think it's so important that we talk about this.
Yeah, and we kind of, we see this from the very beginning of time. If you know the story of Adam and Eve, you know that they sin, and right off the bat, God comes and he's like, hey, what did you do? And Adam goes, well, the woman told me. And then she goes, well, the serpent. And then they point the finger, and it's really hard. And you recognize right off the bat that it was really hard for them to actually take ownership of their mistakes, for them to just say, yeah, this is what I did. I messed up.
So why is taking ownership so hard? First thing that comes to mind is similar to what I kind of shared from my own life experience, my little story, is the first thing we see is pride, hands down.
Yeah, so Proverbs 21 verse 4 says, haughty eyes and a proud heart, the lamp of the wicked are sin. And so for a lot of us, we kind of approach our, the way that we see ourselves with this like haughtiness and this like, oh, I am, I want to appear greater and better, and I want people to think highly of me. And so we struggle with the idea of others thinking less of us. So we don't want to admit that we're wrong because, I don't want somebody to think I'm dumb or stupid or like I didn't know something or I messed up in this way or I'm bad in whatever way. And we're afraid of it tainting our image. So that, that can be a huge factor.
Another way pride also plays a huge role is sometimes we genuinely think that we're just better or that we just know better than others. And on many levels, it actually shows our major lack of self-awareness. And I know personally, something that I definitely struggle with, and I constantly have to remind myself, you know what, I don't know everything. I don't know all perspectives in all situations. And it's important to correct ourselves here, but this is where pride will also get us here. Proverbs 26:12 actually says, do you see a man who is wise in his own eyes? There is more hope for a fool than for him.
Yeah, so it kind of gives you that idea that somebody who just thinks highly of themselves and thinks, that they are wise is likely somebody who is not as wise as they think they are, and their pride is kind of blinding them. Another aspect could be just the effect of nurture on your, and like the environment that you grew up in. And so maybe you were never taught a healthy way to take ownership or, or apologize. Maybe all you saw were fights and there were very defensive people and people were always like going back and forth.
Maybe all you received or what you felt, all you received as a kid was just criticism. Growing up, all you received was criticism, just negativity rather. And so now, today, as an adult, you're constantly triggered at anything negative, even if they're right. You're triggered, and you can't help but your defenses kind of just rise up. Another reason why pride also, another reason why it's so hard to take ownership is because it never feels good. I really don't know of a time it felt good when everybody's feeling good again, but never in the moment does it feel good. And so it's not something that we naturally gravitate towards doing or surrounding ourselves with people who are willing to call us out as well. We're kind of like, no. I'll put the people who are most likely just going to look past what I'm doing or look past my flaws so that I'm not the one who's kind of being outed here because I don't like how it feels. And it's a very real thing, and I think we all really struggle with that.
Did you want to share the verse that went with that?
Yeah, 2 Timothy 4, 3-4. For the time is coming when people will not endure sound teaching, but having itching ears, they will accumulate for themselves teachers who to suit their own passions, and will turn away from listening to the truth and wander into myths. And obviously he's talking about doctrine and teachings, but wandering away from truth, not holding the truth, is the same principle, where it's like I'd rather just hear what I want to hear rather than actually willing to hear what I know I need to hear.
Yeah, the idea of having itching ears that will suit your own passions, like your ears want to hear those things that sound good and that please you, and it's true. We want compliments, we want flattery. We might not be good at receiving them, but we want them, and because of that, it's really hard to receive criticism.
Yeah.
Another aspect is there could be consequences that you don't want to face, right? Like sometimes by like admitting that we're wrong or that we've made a mistake, there are natural consequences. Maybe we've broken someone's trust and so now they won't trust us anymore. Maybe we've lied and so there's a consequence, or maybe we've broken something and so there's a consequence. Whatever that consequence could be, there can be consequences, and we have to sometimes we think that we can get away with not taking those consequences on, and we just go, okay, well, if I don't admit that I was wrong, then I don't have to deal with the consequences.
Yeah, and these are all the same reasons why people don't like receiving criticism and why people also don't like giving criticism. You end up putting yourself in an uncomfortable place when you have to call someone out. When, let's just be real, okay? It's much easier just to say nothing and to overlook it and kind of go, I didn't see anything, Hence why taking ownership can, yes, also be hard, but if there aren't people around us who are willing to actually speak into our lives and help us with that, it literally becomes impossible. We can kind of live in our own bubble a little bit and just go, I'm just going to do me, and nobody really can speak into what's going on.
So why is it important to take criticism well?
Great question. What do you think?
I think one of the thoughts that comes to mind for me is that, as we learn to share with one another openly, as we learn to give criticism, receive criticism, admit that we're wrong, take ownership for our mistakes, it actually deepens our relationships and our connections. We get to know each other better. We get to understand each other better. We get to trust each other more. And it's a way that we can actually grow together in relationship, whether it's friendship or it's family relationship or a romantic relationship. It actually grows the relationship that the two of you have. And it's also something that, Jesus calls us to do. He calls us to, as Romans 12 says, live peaceably with all. It says, if possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. And so the idea is that we learn to deal with conflict, not that we run away from conflict. Yeah. We learn to deal with conflict. We learn to live peaceably with people, and that actually helps grow us together.
Yeah, it's also key to emotional and spiritual growth and just maturity, taking ownership and learning to give and receive criticism is important because it leads to growing up, maturing as a believer. So we're not a child in an adult's body, you know what I mean? Kind of going through the emotions and acting like, yeah, we're grown up when really we've just been hiding away from all the things that we need to be embracing. And here's the thing, practice definitely makes perfect. I probably shouldn't say perfect, but practice definitely helps it, okay? So the more you actually, for a lack of analogy, the more you get your reps in, the more you take ownership, the more you openly apologize without being defensive, the more you are willing to step up, speak into your, friend's life, spouse's life, partner's life, and actually give that healthy criticism that they might need to hear, the better you typically will get with it. Now, I don't want to say everybody just gets better, because sometimes you can just, criticism can come with a very negative connotation. And it's important to understand what that looks like, which is what we're going to get to. But as long as you're approaching it in a healthy way, it's something that you will just get better with learning how to actually approach people in a very loving and open way.
Yeah, I think for a lot of us, we need to get to a place where we're willing to ask for feedback and ask for criticism sometimes. And it's hard to get to that place, but it's actually something that's important and something that's good for us. And it gives us a space where it can be done in a healthy way, because it's not done in the heat of conflict. Yeah. Psalm 141 actually shows the value of this, and it says in verse 5, "Let a righteous man strike me, it is a kindness. Let him rebuke me, it is oil for my head. Let my head not refuse it, yet my prayer is continually against evil deeds." So the idea here, he's like, let this righteous person rebuke me and call me out, because it's actually a blessing for me. And that's what the idea of oil on the head was. If somebody anointed you with oil, that was a sign of blessing, and it was a sign of favor. And so he was like, I would be blessed or favored if I got rebuked, because he recognizes the value that he gets to grow and he gets to do good when he does that.
So we knew that it was important. We thought we'd spell some reasons out. So in case you were not convinced, hopefully you're convinced. So here's the question. How do we get better at taking ownership and receiving criticism?
One of the first thoughts that came to mind for me was just having a growth mindset. Being somebody who's like, I want to be better. I want to be better in all areas. And so because of that, I'm recognizing that this is a way to do so. Like when I receive criticism from people, it's actually for my own self-improvement. We talk about self-help books and self-help podcasts and self-help, whatever, but these are there are practical ways to actually get the feedback and the help that you need. And people who know you the best, like people who are the closest to you, they're the people who can give you that feedback and that criticism that you need. And it can be constructive criticism. It doesn't have to be just you suck. It can be constructive criticism, but it's a way for you to grow.
Yeah.
And so recognizing that this is a way to grow, but also that this is an area to grow in.
Yeah. 1 Peter 5, verse 5 to 6 actually says, "Clothe yourself, all of you, with humility toward one another. For God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that at the proper time he may exalt you." I think it's so important to make an intentional effort at trying to be humble. What is that? Humility, right? Is holding to an accurate assessment of who you are, nothing more, nothing less. Not puffed down or not puff up. It's not like I'm, like a little bit more, or I'm not. Oh, I'm nothing at all. It's being accurate to who you actually are, and I think humility is a huge factor when it comes to this.
Yeah, Romans 12, verse 3, it says, "For by the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you to not think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think with sober judgment, each according to the measure of faith that God has assigned." So the idea of thinking with sober judgment just kind of gives you that clarity that, like, you're supposed to be seeing things as they are, not with, like, some sort of colored lens.
Yeah.
And so with that comes the idea of also being more self-aware, recognizing the, who you are, the impact that you have on people, the way that people are perceiving you, or the people are reacting and responding to the things you say. And sometimes that, some people are just lacking in self-awareness. And so that becomes really hard, because just recognizing that you're lacking in self-awareness is hard to do when you're not self-aware. But then if you are aware of that, then that's a great first step. And then making moves where you're like, okay, I know that this is a challenge for me, so I'm going to actively invite people in to give me feedback, to point out where there may be challenge areas where I may not have understood something. Even sometimes recapping a situation, being like, hey, this is how I perceived it, this is how I saw it, and hearing what other people have to say can be very helpful in those situations.
Yeah. So learning to be more self-aware, super important. There are so many ways, you're talking about the people around you. There are ways to actually, whether it comes through reading, whether it comes through reading the scriptures, whether it comes through even just, going to a therapist, or if you have a pastor, going to just pastoral counseling, and just dialoguing, having conversations, open dialogue, journaling, being a little bit more reflective. It'll kind of be like the jump start that you need to your car to start getting it going, so that you can be a little bit more reflective and a little bit more self-aware. Another aspect I think also that's super important when it comes to just, how to get better at taking ownership and even just receiving criticism. One of the things I think is huge that is a little bit controversial in our day and age, but you know what, I'm gonna stand by it anyways, is changing your perspective on how you actually see yourself. Usually we have too high of a view or too low of a view of ourselves. We see ourselves in a light where it's just like, oh, I am whatever, right? Like I'm the best, or I'm whatever, fill in the blank. And this causes us to then view others or view the situation that we're in very differently, very uniquely. And this actually leads to so much more puffed up pride or whatever that might be. And it ends up becoming our downfall. And we don't realize that we actually have to re-see ourselves, in an accurate light, not kind of like this, whether it's, more puffed up, or on the other hand, a little bit more, of false humility.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm all for self-love, love yourself and think positively of yourself, but recognize also, you are imperfect, and find a way to accurately assess those imperfections and those flaws.
Yeah, I think it's important, as a Christian, I think it's important to recognize God loves you just the way you are. And you don't need to kind of sell yourself up that if you are not the best at whatever, then God loves you less. Your value goes beyond anything that you can do or offer to your God, because at the end of the day, it's the heart that matters, and all of our hearts are equal in that sense. Sorry, a little sermon there, because I haven't preached this past 2 weeks. But anyhow, my point is, all of that said, that when it comes to God and when it comes to offering ourselves up, when it comes to understanding that relationship, being self-aware is super important, but don't let it come at the cost of pride and kind of, being super puffed up, or the other side of it, which is false humility. Like doing something and then going, oh, no, it's not me, it's just God. No, it's not me, no, it's just God. I'm like, bro, God used you, okay? Just acknowledge that, sure, absolutely, give God all the glory, but don't let it lead to a false humility where God didn't even use you. We can have the other side of the, other side of the things where, like, God gave you 2 hands and 2 feet to use you as an instrument. Praise God that he gave you as the instrument. But the false humility often comes in, and that's just one aspect. False humility can also look like other things as well. For example, pride can come in not just in that sense, but it can also come in as self-pity. Super like, oh, woe is me, that whole mindset where it's just like everybody's against me, or everybody's attacking me. If you know the story of Elijah, we look at his depression. Trust me, it's actually coming from a place of pride. He's like, I'm the only prophet left. If you go read the story, he's not, but that's what he feels. And so that's what his perspective is.
Yeah, so like self-pity, victimization, defeatist mindset, a lot of that kind of goes hand in hand, and it's very easy when you're in a situation where somebody has something negative to say, for you to just like immediately kind of spiral into one of those and just go, well, like they think so negative of me, like I'm, yeah, that's right, I'm the worst, I'm always to blame, I'm the bad guy, I'm always gonna be the bad guy, and have that kind of like attitude about it. Yeah,
and that's pride, believe it or not, that's pride speaking, and be aware of it, because it's pride, but it looks like humility, it looks like, oh, you're just going through a hard time.
One thing, and I think this is it's not such a small thing, but it can really change your perspective, is recognizing that when you do something to bother somebody or upset somebody or something that just like makes them feel uncomfortable around you, they can choose to dissociate with you. Like they could be like, you know what, I don't want to spend time with you. The fact that they don't choose to do that and they approach you anyways and they try to have a conversation about it, it's actually harder for them. And they do that because they care about you. I think for a lot of us, we go, well, this person just hates me and that's why they're coming at me and they're talking to me about these things. But the truth is, for a lot of, not in every case, but in a lot of situations, it's like if these people are continuing to have a relationship with you and they're approaching you to talk about this, it's the complete opposite of that. It's not because they have something against you, it's because they actually care for you deeply.
Yeah, it's so interesting because being a pastor, being someone who's oftentimes the so-called bearer of bad news who has to come and kind of go, hey, how's it going? What's going on here? Being that guy, oftentimes I get the brunt. It's just like, oh, that pastor, he just, I'm like, dude, I care about you, which is why I'm trying to step in here. But oftentimes it doesn't get, translated well, and it's usually because the defense mechanism's going up, and we're going, no, you're just attacking me. And we understand where it's coming from, but also need to understand how to properly approach that. Also, I think it's important to recognize that if you're not in a place to receive the criticism, be honest about it. Maybe revisit the conversation when the emotions are not so high. I often find it's the worst time to deal with things like this when the emotions are high. And sometimes you don't really get a choice, like for example, you're in a car crash, you don't really get a choice. You can't be like, I'll see you next week and we'll figure this out. It's like, you gotta deal with things then. But in moments when you can, you figure it out. You're like, all right, listen, we can talk about this in a week's time, nothing's gonna change, and hopefully my heart will be a little bit less emotionally charged and we can dialogue.
Yeah, and that could be whether it's like because of conflict in the moment and so you don't want to discuss it, or whether it's like an area that's sensitive, you're going through something, like that's okay too. Just being open and sharing that and being like, recognizing that I'm not in the place to receive this right now, but I also know that I can't stay in this place. Like you can't just be like, I'm not in the place to receive criticism ever. Like you can't stay in that place.
Yes.
And then working towards getting to a place where you can have that conversation.
Yeah.
Another important thing that, and this is something I will tell you I struggle with this a lot, and I have to constantly check myself in conflict not to do this, is making inner vows. Like, do not make inner vows.
What's an inner vow?
So an inner vow could look like, let's say I make a meal for Reuben. And
I say it's garbage.
Yeah, he doesn't like it. And then I'm like, well, you know what? Like, I'm never cooking for him again. And so I now have made an inner vow that I'm never going to cook for him ever again. And I hold on to this inner vow. And every single time, the occasion arises, I'm like, nope, I'm not going to do it because I'm never going to cook for him again. And he might not even know about it. It's just within me. So that's what an inner vow kind of looks like. And it could be something silly like that. It could be something bigger. But the idea behind them is usually that we're still holding on to the negative emotion tied to the situation, and we're deciding and making decisions that are permanent decisions that we're not going to budge on this because of the negative feelings that we're holding on to. And so I personally struggle with this one a lot. I've gotten to a place now where I'm very quick to recognize it, but they come up in my head all the time. And so it comes up and I'm like, I'm never gonna do this again. I'm never gonna say this again. And then I stop and I go, okay, that's an inner vow. That's not a healthy thing to do. I need to stop and address the situation where I'm at right now. I have to actually address the emotions that I'm feeling right now rather than holding on to them for later and for a longer time.
Last but not least, and let's just be real, this is not an exhaustive list by any means, but just another way how you can kind of improve and help yourself take more ownership and receive, criticism in a better way is learn to not jump to assumptions. Run into the assumption of, oh, they think less of me, or they won't ever trust me again, or, well, I'm always to blame, or they must mean me, whatever the assumptions might be. I mean, we all know what assumptions do, okay? We all know that. And yeah, you know that, I know that, I don't have to say it. But assumptions aren't healthy, and they will only lead us to a unhealthier place. And so we love to talk about clarifying conversations here at Zoe. I think I've made all y'all sick and tired of that, but that's okay. I'll still have the clarifying conversation about that. Have a conversation in those moments when you're like, I'm not entirely sure. I'm puzzled. There's a question. Don't know how they feel. Ask that clarifying question. Get into that and go, hey, I'm just curious what's going on. And hopefully that'll lead to a better place than you just being, kind of filled with assumptions.
So, those are just some tips, some of the things that come to mind when it comes to receiving criticism. But ultimately, when you're in a situation like that, the conversation goes two ways.
Yeah.
And there's another person on the other end. And so we thought it wouldn't make sense to not address that side and address, there are also good and bad ways to give criticism or tell someone that they've hurt you or tell somebody that they did something wrong. And so we wanted to just kind of address what are some good ways that we can give criticism so that it will be better received. Because when you hit somebody over the head with a negative comment, they might not receive it as well as when you give it to them graciously.
Yeah. Two verses that kind of stand out. And again, we're referencing verses because not only are we pastors, but we're Christians. We're people who follow Jesus, and we believe there's deep valued principles here. Two things that kind of stand out to us. Proverbs 27:17 says, "Iron sharpens iron, and one man sharpens another." And then Hebrews 3:13 says, "But exhort one another every day, as long as it's called today, that none of you may be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin." As Christians, as people who love Jesus, this is what we believe, that we actually are here to sharpen each other, here to better one another, here to exhort one another, and really call out the best in each other, whether that looks like correcting, whether that looks like speaking into someone's life because they just need that at the time. And so it is important that we recognize this is a value in the church. This is a value to Christians. And if you're kind of like, I'm not a Christian, I don't really know what that looks like for me, that's okay, totally fair. But as Christians, and if that's what you consider yourself as, this is really important because not only is it scriptural, but it's very biblical as a disciple of Jesus. And so one of my rules that if you come to Zoe, you're part of our church, you've heard this before, you know this. One of my rules is only give criticism to the people who invited you to do so. Nobody likes unsolicited advice. How many of y'all like the unsolicited ads you get with people knocking on your doors? Nobody. I always just don't even answer. Might be rude on my part, but I'm like, hey, bro, if I wanted that ad, I would have subscribed or something. So, like, nobody likes that, okay? And so, and here's the thing. People better receive what you're saying if they've already pre-invited you into the conversation, which means you're like 10 times more effective. And so here's my encouragement and my challenge is that if you have relationships where people have actually communicated to you that, hey, listen, like this is that friendship, or like, in your marriage, in your relationship, hopefully that's communicated. I do not see a marriage going well if it's just like, listen, we're not on those terms yet. We can't, correct one another. It's not going to work. Don't see that working out at all.
Yeah, if you're in a romantic relationship, like that, that has already been communicated. You've chosen to enter into a situation where you are bearing your, like all of your raw emotions and your warts and all. And so everybody should be able to like communicate in that relationship, all of the good and the bad, just do it in the right ways. And so if you find yourself in a situation like that, you're in a romantic relationship where you cannot have those conversations, then you need to assess how to bring things to a healthier place.
Yeah.
Because there might be other things that you need to unpack there. Like maybe somebody has been overly critical in the past, maybe somebody has been overly defensive in the past, and so because of that, you're not able to address those things. But that doesn't mean you stop giving criticism altogether.
Mike's still there. Never mind. And here's the thing, and I love this verse because it's so powerful. This verse got missed. That's okay. Matthew chapter 10, verse 16 says, I am sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves, so be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. It's so important that we be wise, but also our harm would be harmless. At the end of our day, yeah, sure, we're trying to build one another up. Scriptures teach us that. Like, our goal should be to build one another up. Do whatever it is to build each other up, not tear each other down. And sometimes with our words, we can actually use criticism and use, this is exhortation, and we can spiritualize it, going and trying to speak into someone's life, not realizing the way we're speaking to someone or how we're carrying ourselves is actually a lot more negative, not of Christ, and we're actually tearing someone down. And so what I encourage is hold this verse. We're going to be wise as serpents, but we're going to be harmless as doves. We're going to, hopefully help each other grow in a healthier way without bringing harm to the other person. Because at the end of the day, the goal is reconciliation and redemption.
Another, helpful tip is just don't speak with judgment, but use, gracious language, use clarification language. So don't use like blame words, don't use absolutes, you always, you never.
Never use absolutes.
So generally, like that kind of language just gets people's defenses up. It makes them feel defensive, and it you want to come in and you want to approach the situation without having that person already feel on edge. And so doing that in a way where you're approaching it with the appropriate language. And if you can't do that in the situation because you're also emotional, then taking a break and returning to it. But one of the things that, kind of came to mind as I even thought about that, about using blame language and using negative language, was the idea that overall, as a whole, we need to be careful that we're not just sharing negatives. Mm-hmm. We're not just constantly criticizing people. If all you ever do is criticize, then the second you open your mouth, that person is on edge. They're already defensive. Yeah. And so being mindful to be more positive, to be sharing the compliments and the things that are, things that you want to assure them of, things that you want them to feel encouraged by. And, we, in the corporate realm, right, they talk about things like the compliment sandwich and say something positive, then your negative criticism, then something positive again. And I'm not saying do it in this very formulaic way. nice hair, or like, your shirt sucks, but nice shoes, like, your shirt doesn't suck, I like your shirt. But like, don't do that. Like, it doesn't have to be that like formulaic, but the idea behind it is that when it's met with something positive as well, or like when positive feedback is also given, then people are more readily like able to receive criticism. And so not just in the situation where you're like, okay, here's something positive and also something negative, but also generally just being more positive and approaching people with the compliments so that they are willing to receive the negative.
Yeah. Colossians 4:6 actually says, let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person. And so it goes right off of what you were saying.
Yeah, so another thing that I kind of thought was a good idea would be when you're in a relationship context, especially a romantic relationship, using another love language to foster intimacy as you speak.
Yeah.
So we've talked about this one before, but like an easy one is physical touch, right? Like if I hold his hand and as I'm speaking to him, it's like we immediately feel a little bit more connected. It could be like words of affirmation, so some of the positive things that you're saying. It could be an act of service where it's like, I have just done something like nice for this person, they feel good. So doing things that basically fill up this person's love tank so they do feel loved and they don't feel like this is an enemy who's attacking me, and then approaching them with gracious words about the thing that they have done to upset you or the thing that they have done that you don't necessarily like, puts you in a position where like they're much more receptive.
And I think it's important to remember, whether it's a romantic relationship, whether it's your best friend, whether it's your parent, the goal is not just trying to be right. The goal isn't trying to go, yeah, see, I was right and you were wrong, and you're trying to, get the upper hand and winning like that. The goal is not to win the argument, but to win the person overall. If you're bringing some sort of criticism, it's because you're like, there's a way in which I want you to grow. I want you to get better. And you're actually on that person's side. And if that's truly your mindset, your heart and the posture in which you come with is not one to attack. It's, in fact, you're not even going to defend yourself if you start getting attacked, because you're already seeing this person who is hurting and is coming in with a lot of this baggage. And so remember the goal. Don't lose sight of that when you're going in to give someone, that feedback that they might need.
Once you've had a conversation with somebody, I think it's really important that we also don't necessarily hammer it in over and over again. Give people time to actually receive the criticism you've given, to if they've acknowledged something and they would like to change it, to work on it and change it. People are not perfect, and we're not going to just, immediately flip a switch and be like, okay, I'm not going to say that word that they don't like anymore. I'm not going to do that thing that they don't like anymore. It takes time, and we're bound to mess up. We're bound to make mistakes and fail at it a few times. And so don't use every opportunity that they mess up after that to be like, oh, see, you did it again. Nope, you messed up again. Oh, that was that. See? And just keep hammering it in, because that can also make them feel like they're failing and that they can't actually achieve what they want to achieve and actually do better.
Yeah. And learn how to, last point, learn how to de-escalate the situation first. I mentioned it, or we mentioned it a little bit earlier. When the emotions are high, probably not the best time to try and solve big fights and things like that. Learn how to de-escalate the situation. Walk it back, spell out the truth in those moments that you need to kind of just clarify what's actually true and what's not true, and kind of view the situation from the bigger perspective, being the person who is supposed to be coming in at it from a healthier standpoint and not kind of being the person caught up in the middle.
Yeah, I think I recognize this as well. I know that this is something that it happens with us and it happens in a lot of other situations, but sometimes we take small things, like small arguments we have or small fights that we have about something silly, and it becomes a very real, very serious conversation about something that's underlying. And so recognizing that that might not be the healthiest approach to like having a big conversation and going, okay, I'm gonna resolve this small thing. I'm gonna make sure that we're good, and then come back and say, hey, I actually thought about this, and I thought that this might be where it's stemming from. This might be what I'm struggling with or what I'm working through, and so can we talk about that? And when you approach it in that way, it's no longer like, oh yeah, we argued about how, you know, something was put in the wrong place, and that led to how like you don't love me anymore because you never take me out on dates and you stop being romantic. It's like,
Babe,
these
that
are
was a secret.
It's like these are like such extreme things that should not go together, but we have a way of making them go together when emotions are high.
Last but not least, I keep saying last, but there's just one more that came to mind. Tone, and tone. You know that, I'm going to butcher this saying. Here's my point. I don't even know the saying. Don't laugh. I know I butcher sayings. It's fine. Here's my point, okay? What you say is important, but how you say what you say is way more important. I'm going to say that again because y'all are not listening. What you say is important, but how you say what you say is way more important. It's the way in which you communicate, the tone, the body language. It's your eyes. Trust me, they all speak louder. And so when it comes to being in this situation, having these types of conversations, recognize that you need to walk in with the right tone. Walk in with the right tone, walk in with the right heart. 9 times out of 10, you're going to walk out with something that is healthy, that is good, that you're feeling a little bit lighter from. And so I hope that was helpful. That's all we had for this Agape Night. We're going to jump to live Q&A in a few minutes here. So grab some snacks, say hello to your neighbors. Some new people came in a little bit late, so say hello to them too. In a few minutes, we'll come back for live Q&A. My number will go up on the screen, so text in your questions, and we will do that. Okay, bye.